Frank Delaney sat alone in the creaking house that had grown too quiet over the years, a TV humming softly in the corner of the room, casting blue shadows over the walls stained slightly from decades of Missouri humidity and cigarette smoke. The dinner on his plate was lukewarm meatloaf from a frozen tray, the kind he'd stopped tasting years ago but kept buying out of routine, because that's what old people do when life has slowed to a crawl. The only sound beyond the television was the ticking of a dusty wall clock, the one his late wife Lily had insisted on keeping even when the second hand started skipping like a nervous heartbeat. He watched the news like he did every night, not really listening, more like letting the noise wrap around him so the silence wouldn't finish swallowing him whole. The anchor's voice cut through the air with an urgency that made his ears perk. In a classified demonstration leaked to the press just hours ago, Elon Musk's latest AI prototype drone has reportedly outperformed the U.S. military's top-tier tech in real-time combat simulations. The Pentagon has not confirmed nor denied the report, but sources close to Neuralink and SpaceX claim the AI drone showed never-before-seen levels of predictive movement and adaptability. Frank's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" he muttered to no one. The screen flashed a blurred image of a sleek, wasp-like drone hovering over desert terrain, the caption screaming, "Elon's creation outsmarts military tech." "Figures," he said, tossing the fork down, meatloaf sliding untouched. "Another damn genius running the world." But he didn't switch the channel. He leaned forward instead, the vinyl on his recliner groaning under his weight. The news shifted to an old interview clip of Elon Musk. The younger man stared directly into the camera, voice calm but electric. "If something matters to you, build it. Even if no one believes in you. Especially then." Frank stared. Something deep in his chest stirred, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He reached instinctively toward the side table and pulled open the drawer. Inside was a yellowed sketchpad and a pen whose ink he wasn't sure still ran. He flipped through brittle pages until he saw it, Telos, Tactical Autonomous Light Operations System, his drone design from 1987, never built, forgotten in a stack of, what could have beens. He had dreamed big back then, before Lily got sick, before the layoffs at Delphi Tech, before life cornered him and took more than it gave. He traced the lines on the sketch with his finger, and for a moment, he was back in his garage, soldering wires and muttering equations under his breath while Lily brought him coffee and rolled her eyes playfully when he muttered to himself. He could still smell the metal and oil. Back then, he thought Telos could change everything, search and rescue missions, wildfire response, even disabled veteran support. But who cared what an aging ex-engineer with bad knees and a tired heart had to say? His own son barely called. His friends were either dead or sinking into dementia, and society had already written him off, like a dusty VHS in a streaming world. But then he heard Musk's words again in his head. Especially then. And that was the moment it all changed. Without even realizing it, Frank stood up, the act making his joints scream in protest, and walked toward the garage he hadn't entered in over a decade. He had to push hard to get the door open, it groaned and snapped, releasing a cloud of dust that made him cough. Inside was chaos, boxes of old tools, a rusted lawnmower, broken radios, forgotten dreams. But in the back, beneath a tattered blue tarp, was a workbench. He pulled it off like unveiling a corpse. And there it was. The frame. The beginnings of Telos. Metal bones, wires like nerves that never fired. He touched it, and his hand shook. Not just from age, but from recognition. "Still here," he whispered. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? What if the end wasn't the end at all? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, this story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank Delaney stood in the middle of the garage with one bare bulb flickering above him, casting a slow pulse of light across the forgotten artifacts of his younger self. Dust floated like ash in the still air. Every tool, wire, scrap of copper, and circuit board on the cluttered shelves told a story, most of them half-finished, shelved like his ambitions. He ran his fingers across the cold frame of the prototype drone skeleton and felt something deeper than nostalgia. It was grief for a man he used to be, one who had dreams bigger than what the world allowed. He remembered 1974 like it was burned into his bones, a different kind of heat back then, not this ache in the joints or the slow betrayals of the body, but the fire of ambition, of a young electrical engineer with steady hands and boundless ideas. He was 27, working for Delphi Tech on military communications systems. Back then, drones weren't common knowledge, they were whispered about in Pentagon basements and buried inside DARPA budgets. But Frank, with his mechanical genius and stubborn optimism, believed they could be tools of peace, not just surveillance and war. He designed his own variation, Telos, not for attack, but for protection, for saving lives when it was too dangerous for humans to go. It was small, agile, adaptable. It could scan terrain, detect heat signatures, even perform basic AI-led coordination with other units. The problem wasn't the technology, it was timing. The Cold War swallowed all funding into aggression, not innovation. His ideas were too soft, too forward-thinking. No one listened. Except Lily. God, Lily. She had eyes that held entire novels in their gaze and a mind sharper than his soldering iron. She was an art teacher, but she could tear apart an engineering flaw better than some of his colleagues. They met at a community fundraiser in Springfield. He was awkward and nervous, she was bold and curious. Their first date was supposed to be dinner, but ended up in the garage with him explaining electromagnetic fields with pieces of wire and chewing gum. She called him "my mad scientist" and said it like a compliment. She was the only person who ever told him to stop playing small. In 1980, she helped him sketch the first official prototype of Telos on the dining room table. One day, she said, people will be using drones to save kids from floods and fires, and we'll have started that revolution right here between the meatloaf and the mashed potatoes. He believed her. They almost launched a business. She designed the logo. He filed the patent paperwork. But then the baby came, Jacob, and suddenly there were hospital bills and a mortgage, and Lily wanted to stay home. Then Delphi laid him off during the Reagan cuts. He took smaller contracts, then even smaller ones. Eventually he took a job repairing copier machines. The prototype was put away, the tools boxed up, and Telos became nothing more than an old man's story told over beers at the VFW. Lily never made him feel guilty, never once. But he could see it in her eyes, the disappointment, not in him, but in the world for not seeing what he had to offer. She still brought him coffee when he tinkered late into the night. She still kissed his neck and said, "One day, you'll get back to it." Then, in 2002, cancer came and didn't wait for him to finish grieving. She was gone in 9 months. He never touched the garage again. The house had been a home once, full of life and debate and music, but after Lily, it became a slow echo. Jacob moved to St. Louis and built his own world, with his own rules. Frank tried to be close, but he never quite got the code to unlock his son's life. There were a few Christmases together, then fewer. Then birthdays turned into text messages. After the pandemic, they barely saw each other at all. Frank told himself it was normal. Kids grow up. They have their own problems. But it gnawed at him in the quiet hours. What if he hadn't just let go of the invention? What if he'd let go of himself? What if that was why the distance grew, why Jacob looked at him with pity instead of pride? He had wanted to pass something down. Not just genes or stories, but a reason to dream. And now? Now the only thing that kept him company was the old television, and the clock, and the weight of everything he never built. Until yesterday. Until that headline. Until that one sentence from Elon Musk, "If it matters to you, build it." That had done something to him. Like a defibrillator to the soul. It wasn't that he idolized Musk. Truth be told, Frank thought the guy was half genius, half maniac. But you couldn't deny the fire. The audacity. The refusal to let small thinking win. Frank used to have that. He used to take a broken microwave and turn it into a signal repeater. He used to draw blueprints on napkins in diners. He used to believe that even if you were born in a trailer park with nothing but second-hand textbooks and calloused hands, you could still shake the world with an idea. That belief had cost him, sure. But it had also made him. Now, at 68, he stared at the bones of Talos like they were the reflection of a life paused, not ended. His fingers ached, yes, but they still worked. His back hurt, but he could still stand. His eyes blurred, but they still saw. Somewhere deep inside, the man he used to be was still alive, buried under routine, regret, and grief, but not dead. Not yet. He looked around the garage and took inventory. His hands found a multimeter that still clicked when he tested continuity. The soldering iron was rusted, but it still heated. There were rolls of copper wire, servo motors, even an old Raspberry Pi board he'd forgotten he owned. The brain might take longer to reboot, but the hands remembered. The engineering was muscle memory. He felt it returning, like a language he hadn't spoken since youth but could still understand. He flipped open the sketchpad and started redrawing Talos, refining it with what he knew now, what he'd learned since. It didn't need to compete with the military, it just needed to fly. Needed to work. Needed to prove that he wasn't just a relic with a recliner and a pension. He was still Frank Delaney. Engineer. Veteran. Dreamer. Builder. And for the first time in 2 decades, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. Not surviving. Not existing. Creating. He stayed in the garage until 3:17 a.m., lit only by the flickering bulb and the glow of a small desk lamp he fixed with duct tape and a prayer. His joints protested every motion, but he ignored them. He wasn't trying to build the future, just rebuild himself. That was enough. That was everything. As he finally stood up and stretched his aching back, he looked at the new sketches, cleaner now, more elegant, the kind of design that came not from youth but from wisdom. Talos wasn't dead. Neither was he. He whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here, Lily." And he swore, just for a second, he felt her smile in the stillness. Frank Delaney woke up late the next morning with the stiffness of someone who had done something foolish, or something glorious. His lower back was howling and his right wrist throbbed with that dull, familiar ache of an old injury from his Navy days, a reminder of the metal ladder he fell off in '77 while installing a prototype signal dish in Okinawa. Still, he smiled when he opened his eyes. Not because he slept well, he didn't, but because for the first time in years, he had gone to bed after midnight doing something that made time disappear. He shuffled into the kitchen, dragging his slippers like weights, and clicked on the old coffee maker with the stained glass pot and the broken handle he'd repaired with zip ties years ago. The clock on the microwave blinked, 12 o'clock, like it always did after a storm knocked out the power the week before. He hadn't reset it. Part of him didn't care what time it was anymore. In the living room, the morning news was already playing. He wasn't sure when he started keeping the TV on all day, but it had become background noise, a synthetic voice to fill the growing silence. Every channel seemed to be talking about Musk's drone challenge now. Unconfirmed sources suggest Elon Musk's new civilian-use AI drone performed evasive maneuvers no known U.S. system could replicate. Frank stood still, mug in hand, and listened. The anchors debated the implications. Was this the end of traditional defense tech? Should the Pentagon adopt Musk's systems? Was it safe for civilians to innovate at this scale? Safe, Frank muttered into his coffee. That's the problem. Safe is just another word for stuck. He wasn't angry, not really, just tired of the word being used as a cage. People told him to be safe all the time now. Doctors. Neighbors. Even the well-meaning grocery store clerk who offered to carry his bags as if he were one hip away from hospice. There was a time in his life when safe meant wearing goggles while welding or using insulated pliers near live wires. Now it meant don't walk too far. Don't eat salt. Don't think too hard. Don't try anything new. That morning, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Jacob Delaney. He blinked. His son never called this early. In fact, he rarely called at all unless there was a holiday, a birthday, or a situation. He picked up. "Hey, son." "Dad," Jacob's voice was already tight, serious. "You okay?" Frank blinked again. "Of course." "Why?" "Saw your name on an old engineering forum last night. Someone posted a link to some drone project. Said you were working on Talos again. That true?" Frank felt a knot twist in his gut, but he held his voice steady. "It is." There was a pause, the kind that makes more noise than shouting. "Dad, are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, that thing was complicated even 30 years ago, and now I've got time to finish it." "But your health is fine," Frank said, sharper than intended. "I've been cleared for light work." "This is light." Another pause. "You're 68, Dad." Frank's grip tightened on the mug. "I'm also still breathing. Still thinking. Still building." Jacob sighed. "Look, I'm not trying to be the bad guy here. I'm just saying, don't push yourself so hard that you land in the ER again. You've got to know your limits." Frank bit down the retort that bubbled up. Jacob had never seen him in his prime. By the time his son was old enough to notice, Frank was already working 2 jobs and fixing toasters on weekends to pay the mortgage. He never saw the designs, the ideas, the late nights with Lily. He only knew the version of Frank who settled. "I appreciate the concern," Frank said finally. "But I'm not trying to build a space shuttle. I just want to see something fly that should have flown years ago." "Okay," Jacob said, though the doubt was thick in his tone. "Just be careful, all right? I can't afford to take off work again if you get sick." The call ended on a flat note. Frank sat down and stared out the window. The backyard was overgrown with wildflowers and weeds now. The garden Lily had once kept was buried under time. He remembered standing out there with her one summer evening, holding hands, talking about launching their business together. He had been so full of life then. Now, people talked to him like he was a carton of milk past expiration. He understood their logic. The world wasn't designed for men his age to do new things. His last doctor's visit had ended with the phrase, "Just take it easy, Mr. Delaney. There's no rush. You've earned the right to rest." As if rest was the reward. As if sitting in a recliner watching old war movies and waiting for death was some kind of grand finale. He walked back to the garage that afternoon, his knees popping like bubble wrap. He pulled out the frame of Talos and began measuring its dimensions. Some of the tech he used in the original design was obsolete now. But parts were more available than ever: Arduino boards, LiPo batteries, high-torque servos, all online with overnight shipping. The hardest part wasn't building it. It was believing he still could. That night, he recorded a short video on an old camcorder he found in the closet. He uploaded it to an old YouTube channel he'd created in 2009 and forgotten about. The title was simple: 68-year-old vet rebuilds drone he designed in 1987. The video was rough. The lighting was bad. But he spoke clearly, honestly. He explained what Talos was, why he built it, why he never finished it, and why he was doing it now, not because he wanted fame or money, but because the world had forgotten what old minds could still do. He didn't expect anyone to watch it. But when he woke up the next morning, there were 312 views and 28 comments. One read, "Wait, is this the same Delaney from the Delphi white paper on adaptive node networks? I thought you vanished." Another, "Sir, this is amazing. Please keep sharing. I'm 54 and just got back into robotics. You're inspiring me. Frank stared at the screen. For a moment, he forgot about the ache in his shoulder or the tightness in his chest that sometimes came at night. He forgot about the calendar full of empty boxes and the phone that barely rang. He only felt one thing, relevance. The feeling that he wasn't fading. That he hadn't been buried, just paused. That his story wasn't finished, and maybe, just maybe, someone still wanted to hear it. Maybe someone still needed it. That night, as he tightened a bolt on the armature and felt it click perfectly into place, he whispered to the empty garage, "Lily, I think I'm waking up." The wind had picked up that morning, blowing dead leaves against the old aluminum garage door like soft taps from forgotten visitors, but Frank Delaney hardly noticed. He was already deep into his work, eyes narrowed behind a scratched magnifying lens as he soldered a joint with the kind of patience that only years of life could teach. The iron hissed against the copper, and a thread of smoke curled into the air, smelling like purpose. His fingers trembled a little, not from fear, but from the long-lost thrill of it all. Building something again, not for a boss, not for a paycheck, but because it mattered to him. The garage, once a graveyard of abandoned projects, had transformed into a living machine. Shelves had been cleared, tools wiped clean, blueprints taped to the wall with painter's tape he found in the junk drawer. A plastic folding table became mission control, stacked with spare parts, battery packs, and half-drunk mugs of coffee. On the concrete floor sat Telos, version 2.0, a blend of vintage inspiration and modern muscle. It wasn't just a drone. It was the resurrection of a part of himself long buried under bills, funerals, and empty days. He had made some changes. The old rotor configuration was inefficient, so he redesigned the propeller system based on newer quadcopter schematics he found in online engineering forums. He swapped out the original radio module for a modern Wi-Fi-based transmitter. The biggest challenge was power efficiency. Telos needed to be light but strong, fast but smart. His solution came during a 3 a.m. rabbit hole on Reddit, where a robotics enthusiast in Norway shared a compact energy distribution algorithm designed for Arctic rescue bots. Frank modified it, adjusted for battery thresholds, and programmed it into the Telos control chip. It worked. It actually worked. He didn't sleep that night. He just sat there, staring at the blinking green LED, a signal that Telos was alive and listening. The next morning, something unusual happened. He opened the garage door. For weeks now, it had stayed shut, partly to keep in the heat, partly to keep out the world. But now, standing there with a working prototype beside him, Frank felt something shift inside. He pressed the remote and the old metal door groaned open, rolling up inch by inch until daylight flooded in. The sun hit the workbench and made everything sparkle just slightly, like the workshop itself was exhaling. He wheeled Telos to the edge, its carbon fiber frame catching the light, and checked everything one more time: rotor blades, motor bearings, signal range, battery level. Then he took a step back, looked at the thing he'd built with his own weathered hands, and said aloud, "Let's fly, old friend." The drone lifted, wobbled slightly, then steadied into a smooth hover. Frank grinned. It wasn't the grin of a child opening presents or a man cashing a check. It was something deeper. The kind of grin that only happens when you prove the world wrong, especially when that world includes your own doubts. He guided Telos up, circling above the trees that bordered his backyard. The wind tugged at it, but the AI-adjusted balance kept it stable. A few birds scattered. Somewhere across the fence, a neighbor's dog barked. Frank maneuvered the drone back down and landed it with gentle precision. He let out a long, shaky breath, surprised to find his hands wet with sweat. Not from fear, but from the weight of what this meant. He could still do it. He could still build. He could still fly. That evening, still buzzing with adrenaline, he posted another video. This time, he showed Telos lifting off, described the changes he made, the problems he solved, the logic behind his code. He didn't script it. He just talked the way he used to when Lily asked about his projects, explaining things like they mattered, because they did. By the time he went to bed, the video had over 4,000 views. One comment read, "Are you accepting interns? My dad is 70 and just watched this 3 times." Another, "This man is the reason I'm pulling my old parts bin out of storage. Let's go, Frank." He smiled as he turned off the light. The next day, he did something else bold. He walked down to the local hobby shop. It was a dusty little place sandwiched between a closed-down bakery and a vape store that always smelled like fake watermelon. The owner, a lanky kid named Mason who couldn't have been more than 23, looked up when Frank walked in. "Can I help you find something, sir?" he asked with a tone halfway between politeness and assumption. Frank nodded. "Need high-efficiency rotors and maybe some backup lithium packs. Got a bird that finally learned how to fly." Mason blinked, clearly not expecting that. "What kind of build?" Frank pulled out his phone and showed a photo of Talos. Mason whistled. "Whoa. That's serious. You build that yourself?" "I did," Frank said. Mason looked at him with new eyes. "That's actually sick, man." Frank couldn't remember the last time someone said sick about something he did that wasn't referring to his cholesterol. Mason helped him find what he needed. As they rang it up, Mason asked, "You, have a channel or something?" "I think I saw a clip of this on TikTok. Someone reposted it, old guy with a genius drone build." "That you?" Frank chuckled. "Apparently so." "Well," Mason said, handing him the receipt, "keep flying, man. This town needs more stuff like that." Walking back to the truck, Frank felt a strange energy in his legs, not youth, not exactly, but purpose. He didn't move faster, but he moved fuller. More certain. He spent that night running test simulations, uploading new behavior patterns, tweaking the obstacle avoidance logic. The smell of hot solder and oil filled the air again, and the sounds of tiny fans whirring replaced the buzz of cable news. The world outside was still loud, wars, elections, crises, but inside the garage, it was just Frank, his thoughts, and the elegant dance of invention. But late that night, around midnight, as he was adjusting a mounting bracket, he felt it. A sharp stab under his ribs. Just for a second. Then it faded. He stopped. Waited. Breathed. It didn't return. Just a muscle pull, maybe. He stood up slowly, his body reminding him, quietly but firmly, that even dreams had limits. But he didn't go inside right away. Instead, he stood in the open garage door, looking out at the stars. "Still here," he whispered. Not to himself. Not to Lily. But to the sky. The sun was climbing through the Missouri trees, casting long golden beams over the backyard, when Frank heard the voice. "Hey. Mister." It was sharp, eager, and came from the left side of the property, the side where the old chain-link fence bowed in the middle, separating his yard from the newly moved-in neighbors. Frank was tightening a bracket on Talos, crouched low near the concrete, when he looked up and saw a kid. Maybe 12 or 13, skinny as a rake, buzzed haircut, wearing a Spider-Man shirt with a small rip at the shoulder and shoes that had seen better days. He had his fingers curled into the fence, his face poking between the diamonds of metal like a curious rabbit. "What you building?" Frank wiped his hands on an old rag. "Drone," he said plainly. The kid's eyes went wide. "No way. Is it, like, a racing one or a spy one?" Frank stood up slowly, the bones in his knees clicking. "It's a little different. It can map terrain, avoid obstacles, process real-time feedback." The boy blinked, then grinned. "That's awesome. I saw your video. You're the old guy who made the military look bad." Frank chuckled under his breath. "Well, I didn't mean to do that exactly. Still, the boy said, clearly impressed. You're, like, famous. Even my cousin sent it to me. Said, look at this grandpa building Iron Man stuff. Frank smiled at the phrase. He hadn't been called famous since the Delphi Tech white paper back in the 80s, and even that had been a footnote. He walked over to the edge of the garage and leaned against the doorframe. What's your name, kid? Eddie, the boy replied. Edward. But no one calls me that except the school nurse. Well, Eddie, Frank said, nodding toward the bench, you want to see what it looks like up close? The boy lit up like a Christmas tree. Really? Sure. But no touching without asking. It's temperamental. Eddie slipped around a fence post and trotted across the yard, sneakers crunching in dry leaves. Frank noticed the kid had a slight limp, maybe from a bad knee or a fall, but he didn't say anything. When Eddie reached the bench, he stared down at Talos like it was a spaceship. Whoa. It's like. I mean, it doesn't even look like a toy. This is real. It is real, Frank said, lifting the drone gently to show the undercarriage. That's the flight controller. That's the AI board. These are obstacle sensors, and this little dome on top is the thermal camera. Used to cost a fortune, now it's about the price of a dinner out. Eddie leaned closer, eyes dancing. Did you go to, like, MIT or something? Navy first, Frank said. Then Delphi Tech. Then a long list of jobs that weren't as fancy. Why'd you stop building this? The question came out like a punch. Frank hesitated, then answered honestly. Life got in the way. People I loved got sick. Work dried up. Then. I guess I just convinced myself it was too late. Eddie didn't say anything for a second. Then he asked, but now you think it's not? Frank looked him square in the eye. Now I know it's not. The boy nodded slowly. Cool. They spent the next hour talking. Eddie asked questions non-stop, about motors, gyros, programming languages, whether a drone could carry a backpack full of sandwiches, and if Frank thought Elon Musk would ever build a robot dog army. Frank answered what he could, laughing more than he had in months. The boy was sharp. Not polished, not educated in the way schools measured, but curious in the way that mattered most. He reminded Frank of himself at that age, dismantling radios and wondering what made the world tick. Eventually, Eddie's phone buzzed, and he said he had to go. My mom's weird about screen time, he mumbled, already backing toward the fence. But, can I come by again sometime? Frank looked at the kid, this strange little spark of life that had wandered into his garage, and nodded. You can come by any time. Eddie grinned and jogged back across the yard. Frank watched him disappear, the chain-link gate rattling shut behind him. When he turned back toward Talos, he noticed something strange, not about the drone, but about himself. He felt lighter. Not physically, but spiritually. Like someone had just cracked open a window in a long-sealed room. That night, Frank checked his video channel. Over 18,000 views now. Dozens more comments. One caught his eye, "Hey Frank, I teach high school robotics in Oregon. Showed your video to my class. We're rooting for you. Also, one of my students said you look like the grandpa from Up, but cooler." Another, "My dad just turned 70 and cried watching this. Said he's starting his model train AI project again. You're lighting fires, man." Frank sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, hands folded in his lap. He hadn't set out to inspire anyone. He just wanted to finish something. But now he was starting to see the truth. Maybe finishing something was how you inspired people. Not with speeches or slogans, but with proof. With motion. With action. He opened his inbox. Among the spam and comment alerts was a message from someone named T. Burgess with a SpaceX email address. Subject line, curious about Talos. Frank opened it, expecting spam, but it was short and clean. Mr. Delaney, came across your video. Would like to learn more about Telos. Are you open to a conversation about its capabilities? Best, Taylor Burgess, Advanced Systems Analyst, SpaceX. Frank blinked. You've got to be kidding me. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then clicked reply. All he wrote was, absolutely. He didn't tell anyone about the email. Not Eddie, not Jacob. Not yet. He didn't want to jinx it, didn't want to spin fantasy from a thread. But deep down, something stirred. The project he thought would end in his garage, might not end there at all. That night, Telos hovered again under the stars, steadier this time, smoother. The backyard lights flickered on as the drone rose higher, and Frank, standing below, arms crossed, heart steady, felt something come full circle. He was no longer building for legacy or even for redemption. He was building because he could. Because creation, in its purest form, was what made him feel alive. He looked up at Telos, silhouetted against the night sky, and whispered to no one in particular, let's see how high you can go. Frank sat in front of his computer screen for a long time after sending the reply to Taylor Burgess at SpaceX, his hands hovering slightly above the keyboard like he wasn't sure what came next, like hitting send had somehow opened a door he'd sealed shut for decades, and now the wind was coming in whether he was ready or not. The next morning, while reheating day-old coffee in the microwave and staring at the blinking 12 o'clock clock that he still hadn't reset, his phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was from Taylor. Mr. Delaney, thank you for your response. I'd like to schedule a brief call later this week to discuss your work with Telos. Please let me know your availability. We're particularly curious about your adaptive mapping system and heat signature triangulation protocol. It seems to outperform existing swarm logic models. Frank stared at that line, outperform existing swarm logic models, and almost laughed out loud. His model, the one he first sketched on a napkin in 1986 while waiting for Lily to finish grocery shopping, was outperforming the models the US military had funded with millions. That thought hit him like a second cup of espresso straight to the chest. Not because he doubted it, he knew the logic was solid, he knew Telos was ahead of its time back then, but because after all these years, someone was finally paying attention. He wrote back quickly, trying to sound casual but professional, and proposed a time. Then he just sat there, staring at the screen, realizing he had 3 days to prepare. For what, exactly, he wasn't sure. A pitch? A technical interview? An evaluation? The last time he presented his work to anyone other than himself was 30 years ago, in a dusty conference room with men in ties who didn't understand what they were looking at and only cared about missile capacity. This was different. This was SpaceX. This was the edge of everything. That afternoon, he cleaned the garage like it was sacred. He swept the floor, rearranged the tool bench, wiped every smudge off Telos with a soft cloth like it was a child going to its first day of school. He adjusted the overhead light, replaced the flickering bulb, even dusted the old filing cabinet that hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration. Then he turned on the camera and recorded a new video. It's been a few weeks since I started this, he said, his voice clear, steady, with only the faintest tremor. And I'm realizing something, this project isn't just about proving I can finish something I started. It's about what happens when you stop believing your best work is behind you. I think we tell ourselves that because it's safer. Because failing at 70 feels more humiliating than failing at 20. But let me tell you something, I'm not afraid to fail anymore. Because I've already lived through worse. And maybe that's what real freedom is, when the fear of embarrassment gets smaller than the hunger to build. He paused. So to anyone watching this who thinks it's too late for them, I want to say this, you're not expired. You're just underused. He ended the video and posted it. Then he went back to work. He spent the next 3 days tuning the flight logic, reviewing his notes, and even brushing up on Python commands with an online course from a YouTube creator who looked young enough to be his grandson. He didn't care. He took notes like a college freshman. He reread his old notebooks, pages yellowed and curled at the edges, margins filled with Lily's tiny doodles and side comments. On one page, in her handwriting, she had once scribbled, "What if Talos is just your way back to yourself?" That line stayed with him. It wasn't poetic when she wrote it, just casual, a thought over dinner, but now it rang with weight. Maybe she'd always seen this moment coming. Maybe she knew he couldn't stay buried forever. The night before the call, Frank stood outside under the stars, holding the remote in his hands as Talos hovered above him in a smooth, slow figure eight. The moon was a dull coin in the sky, and the wind was quiet. He watched the machine he built move with precision and grace and thought about how long he'd waited to feel this again, not just capable, but valuable. When the time for the call came, he dressed in a clean flannel shirt, combed back his silver hair, and sat at his desk like he was heading into battle. His laptop camera flicked on, and a few seconds later, Taylor Burgess appeared. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, but she smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Delaney. Good to meet you." "Call me Frank," he said. "Unless I screw something up, then, Mr. Delaney is probably more appropriate." She chuckled. "Frank it is. First off, I just want to say your Talos project is fascinating. I had no idea this level of autonomous logic was being developed independently, especially not by someone working out of a garage." "That makes two of us," Frank replied. "When I built the first version, Reagan was still president and drones were science fiction." Taylor leaned forward slightly, focused. "Can you walk me through the triangulation algorithm you're using? The way you described heat signature prioritization, it's something our team has struggled to replicate without massive computing overhead." Frank launched into his explanation, finding the words easier than expected. Once he got going, it was like flipping a switch. He pulled up diagrams, ran a brief simulation, explained the logic tree and how Talos selected targets based on a priority queue of danger zones, using a modified Dijkstra's pathfinding method that he simplified and hard-coded to reduce latency. Taylor followed every word, nodded, took notes. At one point, she paused and said, "You know, this is the kind of stuff we usually only see in DARPA-adjacent systems. You did all this solo?" "Well," Frank said, glancing at the old notebook beside him, "me and a few ghosts." At the end of the call, Taylor said, "Would you be open to sending us a formal spec? I'd like to bring this to my team. We've got a drone operations group working on something similar, but your approach might leapfrog some of our current limitations." Frank nodded slowly. "I'd be happy to." "Great," she said. "Also, I don't know if this would interest you, but we're organizing a private innovation summit next month. Small group. Elon usually attends, depending on his schedule. If you're up for it, we'd like to invite you." Frank blinked, almost sure he misheard her. "Invite me?" "To present Talos," she said. "It's not every day we see breakthrough tech from someone who isn't already buried under NDAs and venture capital." Frank didn't respond right away. His mind was spinning, but his voice stayed calm. "Yes. I'd be honored." "Good," she said with a nod. "We'll be in touch with details. Thanks for your time, Frank. And, seriously, congratulations. You've built something special." After the call ended, he sat in silence. The room was still, except for the soft hum of the laptop fan. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed his hand on the top of Talos, feeling the cool metal under his fingers. He wasn't just building a drone anymore. He was building a bridge, between the man he used to be and the man the world was finally seeing again. He whispered into the quiet, "We're not done yet." The invitation from SpaceX came 3 days later in an email marked, "Confidential, Private Innovation Summit." Frank opened it with the care of someone defusing a bomb, his breath held just long enough to forget he was holding it. The details were sharp, corporate, but polite. The event would be held in a private facility in Austin, Texas, limited to fewer than 50 participants. No public press. All NDA covered. Presenters were handpicked, and he'd been given a 20-minute slot on the second day. They offered to fly him in, cover accommodations, and ship his drone separately for secure handling. Should you choose to demo, the email read, "Please advise on handling instructions for Talos." Frank read that line twice. It hit differently. For decades, Talos had only existed on paper, in his head, or, more recently, hovering in his backyard under the Missouri moon. Now it was being referred to like it was real, serious, part of something that mattered. He agreed to the terms, filled out the travel preferences, and then just sat there, staring at the screen, wondering what Lily would have said. Maybe she would have said, "Finally." Maybe she would have laughed and told him not to forget extra socks. Maybe she would have told him it didn't matter what they thought of him, as long as he remembered who he was. He stood up slowly, knees cracking, and walked out to the garage. Talos sat on the bench like a coiled hawk, still, deadly smart, patient. "You ready to fly in front of billionaires?" he whispered. He started prep immediately. Tightened every bolt. Cleaned the lens sensors with a lens pen he ordered special. Checked every line of code, every redundancy, every kill switch and emergency return path. He even ran flight drills in the backyard at dusk, watching the shape of Talos move like a bird of prey against the fading purple sky. Eddie watched from the fence sometimes, quiet and wide-eyed, holding a can of soda like it was popcorn. "You think Musk will see it?" he asked one evening. "I think he'll hear it," Frank replied. "I think Talos is the kind of thing that speaks for itself. Wish I could come. You'll be the first to hear what happens." The next week was a blur. The flight was smooth, despite Frank's irrational fear of modern air travel, and the SpaceX-provided car that met him at the Austin airport was silent, electric, and more polite than most humans he'd met. His hotel room looked like something from the future. Automated curtains, lights that turned on when he entered, a tablet beside the bed that controlled everything including the temperature of the water in the shower. He didn't touch the tablet. He liked knobs. Switches. Things that clicked and clunked and made noise. He wore a clean button-up shirt and his old navy blazer, the one he hadn't put on since Lily's memorial. It still fit. Barely. He didn't care. When he arrived at the facility, security was tight but not intimidating. Just efficient. He checked in, signed a short NDA, and was led into a hangar-sized space full of hums and murmurs and people far younger than him with lanyards and devices he couldn't name. Tables held strange tech, autonomous underwater drones, anti-collision bike helmets, flexible solar fabrics. But none of it scared him. Because for the first time in years, Frank Delaney didn't feel like the oldest man in the room. He felt like the one with the most to prove. The Talos unit had been delivered separately and placed gently on a display platform next to a mounted monitor and a short table. It looked perfect. He ran a quick diagnostic. Everything green. He pulled out a flash drive from his coat pocket, plugged it into the console, and loaded a simplified flight pattern for demo mode. The monitor lit up with the interface he'd written himself. Clean. Responsive. Fast. He took a breath. The crowd swelled throughout the morning. Each presentation was quick, sharp, heavy with technical language and buzzwords. But when his time came and his name appeared on the central display, Frank Delaney Autonomous Logic Integration Talos System, he didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. He walked onto the stage with a steady pace, his blazer crisp, his hands loose at his sides. He looked out and saw them, not faces of judgment, but curiosity. Smart people. Restless people. And near the back, someone in a dark jacket with arms folded, watching very closely. He didn't have to guess. That was Elon. "My name is Frank Delaney," he began, voice calm, mic clipped to his collar. I'm 68 years old. I've been building things since I was 9, starting with a radio I pulled out of a junk pile and rewired until it sang again. A few chuckles. He continued. The project I'm showing today is Talos, Tactical Autonomous Logic Operating System. First drafted in 1987. Revived in 2025. Built entirely in a garage, funded by pension checks, and coded on a laptop older than some of you. More laughter. He tapped the console, and Talos rose from its platform, hovering silently as the interface showed the live feedback loop, heat mapping, dynamic obstacle logic, and adaptive pattern responses. It moved with elegance, arcing around a simulated obstruction zone. The screen showed real-time decisions, confidence ratings, projected threat levels, and retreat vectors. Talos doesn't just fly, Frank said. It thinks. It adjusts. It makes decisions faster than most commercial drones and more ethically than most human operators. It doesn't rely on a GPS tether or a satellite uplink. It uses ground-based AI logic trees with heat-based triangulation, meaning it can identify survivors in collapsed structures, differentiate between armed combatants and civilians, and do it all in under 3 seconds. The room was silent, except for Talos, which emitted only the softest hum. He landed it gently. Locked the system. Turned back to the audience. I built this because I got tired of hearing it was too late. Too late to matter. Too late to contribute. I didn't build this because I wanted to prove anyone wrong. I built it because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be right. The applause came slowly at first, then louder. People stood. Heads turned. Taylor Burgess met him off stage, her face lit up with something like disbelief. You just dropped a nuke on half our engineering team. Frank just smiled. I've been holding on to that one a while. Minutes later, a man approached quietly, same jacket, same eyes from the back of the room. Mr. Delaney, Elon Musk said, offering his hand. Or should I say, Colonel of the Drone Rebellion? Frank laughed. Only if I get to wear a cape. Elon studied the drone. You built this alone. Every bolt. Every line of code. Elon nodded slowly. It's impressive. Most of our teams take a year to reach that level of autonomous logic. And they have millions in backing. I had caffeine and spite, Frank replied. Elon grinned. Those work too. They spoke for only a few minutes, but it was enough. Elon asked questions, real ones. Smart ones. Not about cost or commercialization, but about philosophy. Decision trees. Fail states. What Talos would do if faced with conflicting life and death outcomes. Frank answered honestly, with clarity, no fluff. At the end, Elon looked him in the eye and said, You didn't just build a drone. You built a message. What's the message? Frank asked. That reinvention has no age limit, Elon replied. And maybe that the best minds aren't on stage, they're in garages. He left as quietly as he arrived. That evening, as Frank sat alone in his hotel room, still in his blazer, the inbox on his phone dinged again. This time it wasn't from SpaceX. It was from DARPA. Subject line, request for demonstration. He set the phone down, leaned back in the bed, stared at the ceiling. The ache in his knees was strong. His back hurt. His eyes were tired. But for the first time in decades, none of that mattered. Because now the world was listening. They never saw him coming. But now they wouldn't forget his name. Frank returned to Missouri 2 days after the summit, and the sky looked different as the plane descended, wide and soft, 1,000 shades of gray, the kind of sky that didn't demand anything from you. But something in Frank had changed. It wasn't just the attention or the applause or the private conversation with Musk. It was the realization that the line between obscurity and recognition could be thinner than paper, that sometimes a lifetime of work could finally be seen with one well-timed spark. The spark had caught. And now it was burning. His inbox was overflowing. Engineers from startups, retired defense contractors, tech bloggers, even one email from a counterterrorism advisor in Europe. But not all of it was admiration. The first sign of trouble came in a headline. He wasn't even looking for it, just checking the news when it appeared under the defense category. Unregulated civilian drone could undermine existing military AI protocols, experts warn. Frank clicked. The article was short but sharp, quoting an anonymous source from within the U.S. Department of Defense who called Telos a dangerous precedent, adding that independent actors developing tactical-level AI without oversight creates national security vulnerabilities. He read it twice, stunned. Dangerous? The thing he built to help, to rescue, to protect, was being labeled a threat. It wasn't just that article. Within 48 hours, another op-ed appeared in a tech defense magazine. Then a cable news segment, complete with grainy video of Telos flying in his backyard, clipped from his original video post. A talking head in a blue suit said something about a retired hobbyist building battlefield tech without government review. Another guest said, "We have procedures for a reason. Innovation can't be the Wild West." Frank sat at his kitchen table, the screen glowing in front of him, the hum of the refrigerator the only other sound in the room. The sting didn't come from the criticism itself. He'd had ideas rejected before. It was the assumption that his age, his independence, made him irresponsible. That he couldn't possibly understand the implications of what he'd built. That he didn't belong in the conversation. That was what stung. That and the fact that none of these people had called him. Not one of them had asked what Telos was actually designed to do. Not one of them had tested it. They just saw a headline and filled in the rest with fear. A few days later, he got a voicemail from his son Jacob. "Dad, we need to talk. I saw the news. Please call me." Frank hesitated before dialing. It had been months since they spoke, and even then, it was stiff, awkward. Like two men trying to find a language they'd both forgotten. When Jacob picked up, his voice was cautious. "Hey. Hey. You okay?" "I'm fine. You?" "Yeah. Just, wanted to ask what's going on. I mean, it's everywhere. Mom would have had a field day." Frank smiled faintly. "She'd be yelling at the screen, telling them to put me on and let me talk." Jacob chuckled. "Yeah, she would've. Listen, Dad. I'm proud of you. I am. But are you sure this is safe? I mean, people are always saying something," Frank interrupted, not unkindly. "But here's the truth, Telos doesn't carry weapons. It doesn't spy. It doesn't kill. It thinks. And that's what scares them. Why would that scare anyone? Because it didn't come from them. Because it proves you don't need clearance or contracts to create something better than what the system produces. Because I didn't ask permission." Jacob was quiet for a second. "That's a hell of a message." "It's not a message. It's a reality check." After they hung up, Frank opened his laptop and started drafting a response. Not a manifesto. Not an apology. Just the truth. He posted it to his channel, along with a new video. "There's been some noise lately," he said to the camera. "People saying what I've built is dangerous. That I'm irresponsible. That innovation like this shouldn't happen in a garage. I want to be very clear, Telos was never designed to hurt anyone. It was designed to help, to find people in danger, to avoid unnecessary harm, to learn from situations in real time. It doesn't launch missiles. It doesn't spy on citizens. It doesn't act unless it understands. What scares the system isn't what Telos does. It's what Telos represents. That a man in his 60s, without funding, without clearance, without an army of interns, can still build something that moves the needle. I won't stop. Because I'm not the only one out here with unfinished work. And maybe if more of us believed we still had something to offer, the world would look a little different. The video took off. Again. But this time, something shifted. Older viewers, especially, started commenting in droves. Stories poured in, of abandoned projects, buried inventions, regrets turned into rekindled passions. One man said he pulled his old telescope out of storage and began cataloging stars with his grandson. A woman shared photos of a hydroponic garden she'd always wanted to start and finally had. Another man simply wrote, "I was waiting for permission. Thanks for showing me I didn't need it." Eddie showed up that weekend, face glowing. "You're like a legend now. Even my science teacher brought you up." Frank laughed. "Don't believe everything they say." "I don't," Eddie replied. "That's why I'm here. I want to learn it from you." Frank looked at the boy, eyes bright, shirt slightly crooked, notebook under one arm, and nodded. "All right then. Let's get to work." They spent hours in the garage. Frank explained PID loops and battery voltage levels, taught Eddie how to solder without burning his fingers, how to read serial logs, how to understand what Talos was doing by listening to its movements. Eddie picked it up fast. Faster than Frank expected. One afternoon, after a particularly smooth test flight, Eddie asked, "Why do you think they're so mad?" Frank thought for a long time. Then said, "Because I didn't follow the rules. And people in power like rules. They like predictability. They like knowing who's in control. But Talos, it was built by someone they forgot. And that makes it hard to categorize. Hard to contain. But it's not wrong." "No," Frank said. "It's just inconvenient." That night, another email came, this time from an unexpected address. A private account. No logos. No signatures. Just a plain message, "I've seen what you built. I understand the threat it poses, not to national security, but to the idea that control only belongs to the few. Be careful. When something works too well, it becomes dangerous to the wrong people." Frank read it 3 times. There was no name attached. No follow-up. But it chilled him more than anything he'd seen on the news. He shut down the computer and stood in the dark garage, lit only by the soft blue glow of the Talos charging port. Somewhere between awe and fear, he whispered, "What the hell did I start?" When the DARPA email landed in Frank's inbox, he stared at it for a long time, as if expecting it to vanish when he blinked. There were no flashy headers, no pomp or circumstance, just 4 words in the subject line, "Request for demonstration only," followed by a single sentence, "We'd like to see Talos in person." For decades, DARPA had funded the kinds of ideas Frank dreamed of, from early UAV prototypes to the heart of drone swarm research, but those projects had power, budgets, and big backs. Frank had none of that. He had grit. He had his garage. He stared at the screen until the cursor blinked and he realized he was crying. Not tears of fame, but of recognition, like someone finally reading your diary and spotting the truth you printed in invisible ink all those years ago. He replied immediately, accepting the invitation, no second thought wasted. In the days that followed, he prepared with methodical resolve. He studied DARPA's recent moves. Their VTOL drone strides under the Evade program, their drive toward AI that warfighters could trust, and the offset swarm ambitions. All of it hummed around him, but never against him, because Talos wasn't competing with history. It was standing on it. He polished every bolt, rewrote his code comments for clarity, and logged test flights at dawn, the drone circling above wildflowers in golden light. He recorded a short video for DARPA, real, human, grounded. No drama, just he and Talos, the old engineer and his purpose. The demonstration was scheduled at a secure military testing site, a decommissioned airfield with hangars that smelled of jet fuel and stale ambition. He arrived in his own car, and after being checked and rechecked past ID scanners and camouflage-clad guards, he was escorted into a sterile facility that felt too silent. It made Frank's garage feel like home. Talos arrived in a crate, and with nervous hands Frank set it up on a test pad outside, under an eye-achingly bright sky. The DARPA team watched in silence as he powered Talos up. The drone spun its rotors, scanned the field, then took off with uncanny grace. It performed flight patterns he taught it, hovered, dodged obstacles, triangulated heat sources hidden under tarps. It even made one of the remote sensors, meant to simulate a human, bleep unexpectedly when Talos passed over. The team halted the test and looked at Frank. One of them, a serious-looking woman, said, "Your drone avoided that despite no GPS, no satellite backup. That's impressive." Frank just nodded. It was always meant to think on its own. Another team member tapped a screen. "Your autonomy logic, especially the heat signature priority queue, is ahead of some of our funded models right now." Frank felt something bud in his chest. Maybe that's the word for it, validation. He hadn't needed awards or contracts. He just needed to not feel forgotten. He answered their questions honestly, without theatrics. Even when one engineer asked how he, alone, had done it, he replied, "Pension checks, late nights, and a stubborn need to matter again." After the test, he was led inside to a stark conference room. On the polished table sat envelopes. In one was a letter offering him a small grant, not to give up Talos, but to build the next version alongside DARPA engineers. Another contained an invitation to join their summer innovation workshop, where retired innovators and young academics came together. It felt like someone handing him a seat at a table he'd been staring at from the hallway for decades. Driving back home that night, he stopped at a diner, and the aromas of fried eggs and coffee reached something deep in his memory. He thought of Lily's laughter, of Jacob's distant pride, of Eddie's eager questions. He took a seat by the window and ordered a burger. No kale. Just something real. His phone pinged. It was a message from Taylor at SpaceX, "DARPA wants to talk with us," and they mentioned Talos. Frank stared at the screen, blinking. That mantra, one spark lighting another, pulled tighter around his heart. When he got home, the mailbox held a letter in thick paper, an official DARPA crest. It didn't roar. It whispered. Inside, a note, "Your work is a bridge, across time, between old and new, between belief and proving. Thank you for reminding us who can still change the world." He pressed it to his chest, and for once, his back pain receded, replaced by warmth that felt like home. But the world wasn't without its ripple. Online, his channel comments overflowed with deeper messages. A woman in her 70s wrote, "I just dug out my old manuscript from the 80s, now I'm writing again." A Vietnam vet dug out his rusted transmitter and called his grandson over to show him circuits. It was a wave, quiet, growing, unstoppable. Somewhere across the U.S., old dreams were waking up. Late that night, in the dim garage light, Frank looked at Talos, sleek and silent. He whispered, "We're not done yet, old friend." And maybe Lily heard him. Maybe the world did too. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks after the DARPA demo blurred past Frank like a high-speed train he hadn't asked to board. Suddenly, his quiet days were full of calls, meetings, and video chats with engineers, officials, even journalists wanting to understand the man behind Talos. But with recognition came pressure, and Frank felt it in his bones, the weight of expectations, the worry that any misstep could undo months of fragile progress. He still remembered the whispered threats, the anonymous warnings, the way old friends had distanced themselves, unsure if his newfound spotlight was a blessing or a curse. One morning, a letter arrived that changed everything, a formal invitation to a government summit in Washington, D.C., titled The Future of Tactical AI in National Defense. It was an opportunity and a test. Could a retired engineer from Missouri stand among the country's top defense innovators and policymakers without folding under the weight of their skepticism? He booked the flight but hesitated to tell Jacob. When he finally called, his son's voice was a mix of pride and concern. "Dad, you're really stepping into a world that's not exactly welcoming to outsiders." "I know," Frank said. "But maybe it's time to show them there's more than one way to serve." In Washington, the summit was a cavernous hall filled with sharp suits, sharp words, and sharper gazes. Panels discussed drone swarms, AI ethics, battlefield autonomy. Frank sat near the back, his hands clenched, wondering if he belonged. Then, a familiar voice cut through the noise, Elon Musk, not in person but via live stream, speaking about radical innovation and the courage to challenge norms. "Innovation," Musk said, "is about refusing to be boxed by age, doubt, or convention. The greatest risk is not to risk at all." Frank felt the words pulse inside him like a call to arms. When the Q&A session opened, Frank raised his hand. He shared Taylor's story. The years in the garage, the failed prototypes, the pushback. He spoke plainly, honestly. "We don't need permission to create a better future," he said. "We just need the courage to start." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, a few nods. A young engineer approached him afterward, eyes bright. "Your work reminds me why I got into this field, to solve real problems, not just chase grants." Outside the summit, the press swarmed. Headlines hailed the unexpected voice of innovation, while critics warned of reckless DIY tech threatening national security. Frank shrugged off the noise, focusing on the growing network of older innovators reaching out to him, writers, mechanics, retired teachers who had ideas they'd shelved decades ago. Back home, the neighborhood noticed. Eddie's excitement bubbled over. "I want to build my own drone, Dad." Frank smiled, seeing the fire in the boy's eyes. "Then we'll start tomorrow." One night, as Frank and Eddie soldered tiny circuit boards, Frank looked at the boy and thought about the paths we choose and those we avoid. "You know," Frank said, "it's not just about building machines. It's about building belief, in ourselves and each other." Days later, an unexpected visitor knocked on his door, an elderly woman named Margie, a former aerospace technician who had worked on Apollo missions. She carried a faded photo of astronauts and said, "I saw your story. You remind me of why we aimed for the stars." She asked if she could join their project. Frank nodded, feeling a new chapter unfolding, one where age was a badge of honor, not a barrier. But the crossroads loomed. Government officials hinted at stricter regulations on civilian drone tech. Some wanted Talos grounded, citing unvetted autonomy. Frank realized the fight wasn't just about innovation, it was about who gets to define the future. Late at night, staring at Talos charging quietly, Frank whispered, "We'll show them. We'll build a future that belongs to all of us, no matter our age." And with that, the quiet revolution continued. Frank felt the tension mounting as new regulations threatened to slow the very progress Talos represented. But behind the headlines and policy debates, something quietly powerful was growing, a grassroots wave of older innovators, dreamers, and creators inspired by Frank's story. It started with a message on his channel from Joan, a 68-year-old retired librarian in Ohio. She wrote about how Frank's courage pushed her to revisit a lifelong passion for electronics. Soon, dozens more shared stories of rediscovery, a former mechanic rebuilding a vintage motorcycle with electric parts, a grandmother coding her first app to track neighborhood resources, an ex-teacher creating virtual history lessons for her grandchildren. Frank began organizing weekly video calls, bringing this informal network together. They called themselves the Legacy Builders. No big budgets. No formal leadership. Just a shared belief that age was a beginning, not an end. These sessions buzzed with energy, creativity, and encouragement. Members shared setbacks and breakthroughs, and Frank often found himself amazed by the depth of talent and passion rekindled. One call featured Bill, a 74-year-old engineer who unveiled plans for a low-cost water purification system using recycled materials. Another spotlight was on Marcia, who created a prototype for a wearable device to monitor heart health for seniors. The movement spread beyond the screen. In small towns and cities across the country, legacy builders formed in garages, basements, and community centers. Frank received photos of workshops filled with laughter and tinkering. The narrative of aging shifted from decline to possibility. Meanwhile, Telos evolved. Frank and Eddie worked to integrate feedback from legacy builders, incorporating modular designs so others could customize and improve the drone. Frank's garage became a mini innovation hub, alive with ideas and youthful enthusiasm. But the fight on the regulatory front grew fiercer. Officials argued that unregulated AI drones posed risks of misuse or accidents. Frank responded by advocating for a balanced approach, safety standards combined with encouragement for independent innovation. He penned op-eds, appeared on podcasts, and spoke at community forums. His message was clear: innovation doesn't come from control, but from freedom to explore. One evening, as Frank reviewed emails, he found a surprising note from a congresswoman known for championing technology and aging issues. She invited him to testify at a hearing on emerging tech and senior engagement. It was another chance to push the message: older adults are innovators too, and their contributions can reshape the future. Preparing for the hearing, Frank felt nerves but also a quiet confidence fueled by months of connection with the legacy builders. He practiced his testimony, weaving personal stories with Telos's journey. On the day, standing before a room of lawmakers and reporters, Frank spoke plainly but passionately. He described the loneliness of aging, the lost dreams, and how rediscovering purpose through creation could transform lives. He challenged the committee to support policies that empower older innovators, not silence them. His words resonated. Afterward, several members approached him with genuine interest and support. Back home, the legacy builders celebrated the milestone. For the first time, their voices felt heard in halls of power. Yet, Frank knew the road ahead was long. He returned to the garage, where Eddie waited with fresh schematics and a grin. Ready for the next challenge? Always, Frank said. And in that quiet space, surrounded by buzzing tools and hopeful hearts, the revolution continued, one invention, one connection, one rediscovered dream at a time. The hum of the garage was steady and comforting as Frank and Eddie soldered circuits late into the night. Outside, the summer heat settled quietly over the neighborhood, and crickets sang a persistent song. But inside, the buzz of progress was electric. Telos was evolving, not just in form, but in mission. Frank had begun conversations with unexpected allies, a group of young engineers from a local university, eager to learn from the man whose drone had captured DARPA's attention. They were part of a student-led robotics club, hungry to build something meaningful beyond classroom assignments. When Frank first met them, he expected skepticism. Instead, he found open minds and fresh ideas. The youngest, a bright-eyed woman named Maya, challenged him to think differently about Telos's applications. Why focus just on military tech, she asked one afternoon, eyes sparkling. What about disaster relief? Environmental monitoring? Imagine what Telos could do if we teamed up with local communities. The question lingered. Frank thought of the wildfires last summer, the floods last fall. Technology like Telos, designed for autonomy and resilience, could save lives if it adapted to civilian needs. Inspired, Frank and the students began brainstorming new projects. They reprogrammed Telos to identify heat signatures of wild animals trapped in forest fires, to map flood zones in real time, and to deliver emergency supplies in hard-to-reach areas. The garage transformed into a lab of hope and urgency. But not everyone embraced these changes. Some legacy builders worried that expanding beyond defense might dilute Telos's impact. Stay focused, they urged. You built something that outperforms the military. Don't lose sight. Frank listened but felt a stirring inside him, a belief that purpose could multiply, not divide. One evening, as Frank and Maya tested new sensors on Talos, a notification popped up on Frank's phone, an invitation from a major nonprofit focused on disaster response. They wanted to pilot Talos in their next wildfire season efforts. The offer was thrilling, and terrifying. Could Frank's small team handle such responsibility? Could Talos really make a difference on that scale? The question haunted him as he sat alone in the dark garage. The next day, he called Elon Musk's office, an act born from impulse more than expectation. To his surprise, the assistant put him through. Elon's voice was calm but direct. "Frank, I've been following your work. You're thinking bigger, and that's good. Innovation isn't about staying in a box. It's about breaking them." They talked for nearly an hour, about vision, risk, and the fear of failure that so often paralyzes even the boldest minds. Elon encouraged Frank to trust his instincts and to build bridges across generations and disciplines. That call reignited Frank's fire. Soon after, he announced a partnership with the nonprofit, and preparations began for a field test in a wildfire-prone region. As Talos flew over charred forests, scanning for survivors and reporting conditions, Frank felt something he hadn't in years: hope that his work could protect and connect, not just compete. The media picked up the story, from garage to wildfire frontlines. The drone-changing disaster response. For once, Frank was not just the old man who built a drone, he was a pioneer in a new movement. But with progress came new challenges. Critics questioned the safety of autonomous drones in crowded environments. Regulators debated privacy concerns. Frank faced late-night calls from lawyers and advisors cautioning him to tread carefully. Yet, every challenge was met with resilience and creativity. The legacy builders rallied around him, lending expertise and moral support. And Eddie? He was no longer just a helper, he was a partner, a symbol of the new generation standing beside the old, ready to build a future together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank looked at Talos resting on the workbench. The drone had become more than metal and code. It was a testament to persistence, collaboration, and the power of reinvention. He whispered, "This is just the beginning." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by tools and dreams, Frank knew that the unlikely allies he'd found were the true creators of tomorrow. Frank sat quietly in the small town library, the soft hum of the air conditioning mingling with the faint rustle of pages. Around him, shelves held the stories of countless lives, but his mind was focused inward, on the story he was still writing. The legacy he was trying to build, piece by piece. Years ago, when Talos was just a collection of sketches and failed prototypes, Frank believed that his contribution to the world was behind him. The world had moved on, faster and louder than he could keep pace with. His own family seemed distant, their lives busy with careers, kids, and struggles far removed from his quiet garage experiments. But the spark that Elon Musk's fearless mindset had lit inside him refused to be extinguished. Now, Frank understood legacy wasn't just about invention or public recognition, it was about connection. The question that haunted him was this: what would he leave behind for those who came after him? His son Jacob, once skeptical, had softened in recent months. A phone call last week left Frank feeling both hopeful and vulnerable. "Dad," Jacob had said, "I don't always get what you're doing, but I see it's important. Maybe it's time I got involved." The possibility of bridging years of distance felt both daunting and exhilarating. That night, Frank found himself digging through old boxes in the attic. Dust-coated faded photographs, yellowed notebooks filled with diagrams, and letters from Lily, letters she had written but never sent. Each item told a story of a man who had long felt invisible, a man wrestling with time's relentless passage. Among the papers, Frank found a note from his father, written decades earlier: "Build with purpose, not for praise." Those words echoed louder now than ever. With renewed determination, Frank set out to rekindle fractured relationships. He reached out to Jacob, inviting him to the garage. Their first visit was awkward but honest. They talked about lost time, missed birthdays, and the dreams that never died. Jacob was fascinated by Talos and eager to contribute his tech skills. Together, they began refining the drone's AI algorithms, blending Frank's experience with Jacob's fresh perspective. At the same time, Frank continued mentoring the Legacy Builders Network, reminding them that their inventions were gifts, not just to themselves but to communities hungry for hope and innovation. During a video call, Joan shared her success in launching a community makerspace, welcoming seniors and youth alike. "It's more than technology," she said. "It's healing." Meanwhile, Margie, the Apollo-era technician, helped design user-friendly manuals for Talos, ensuring accessibility for all skill levels. Yet, not every moment was easy. Old regrets surfaced like ghosts. Frank wrestled with the knowledge that time was finite, and some bridges might never fully mend. One evening, alone in the garage, he whispered to Talos, "If this is my last invention, let it be one that connects hearts, not just machines." That same week, a letter arrived from a former colleague who had retired years earlier, inviting Frank to speak at a symposium celebrating innovation across generations. Standing before an audience of scientists, retirees, and students, Frank shared his journey, the doubts, the breakthroughs, the power of never giving up. His words resonated deeply, stirring a sense of possibility that transcended age. As applause filled the room, Frank felt a quiet peace settle over him. He realized legacy wasn't a monument to be built in stone but a living, breathing force, one that grows when passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. Returning home that night, Frank looked at the stars twinkling beyond his window. Somewhere out there, Elon Musk's words still rang true, "The greatest risk is not to risk at all." And in that risk, Frank found freedom. The freedom to create, to forgive, and to love anew. In the stillness of the night, he vowed to keep building, not just machines, but a legacy worth inheriting. Frank woke early, the sharp scent of coffee filling the quiet kitchen. Outside, the sun cast pale gold across the familiar streets of his small town, but today, everything felt charged with possibility. The legacy builders had grown beyond a scattered network, they were becoming a movement, a force challenging stereotypes about age, capability, and relevance. The previous night's virtual meeting had left Frank inspired and energized. Maya and the university students had presented bold ideas for new Talos features, improved AI for environmental monitoring, modular attachments for medical delivery, and open-source software to encourage global collaboration. But the real breakthrough was the announcement of a grant opportunity from a major tech foundation focused on empowering innovators over 60. Frank had submitted the application weeks ago, hoping to secure resources to expand their impact. Now, the news arrived, they were finalists. With that came a whirlwind of preparation. Frank balanced phone calls with community leaders, tech advisors, and longtime skeptics, each encounter a reminder of the hurdles still to overcome. One afternoon, a local newspaper ran a feature questioning whether retirees playing with drones could truly affect national tech advancement. Frank read it quietly, then forwarded the article to his Legacy Builders group with a simple message, "Let's prove them wrong." The next day, the garage buzzed with renewed focus. Joan, Margie, Eddie, and a handful of new recruits crowded around prototypes and laptops. Ideas flew, hands built, and hearts rallied. As the deadline loomed, Frank found himself reflecting on the barriers society placed on aging, barriers not just physical or technological, but mental and cultural. Too old to learn. Too late to start. Irrelevant in a world that moves too fast. These phrases echoed in the background noise of his past doubts. But now, surrounded by collaborators spanning generations, Frank felt those walls crumble. Elon Musk's voice, often playing softly in the background during late-night work sessions, served as a reminder, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The grant proposal highlighted Telos's unique blend of advanced technology and community focus. It emphasized how this project wasn't just about drones or AI, it was about reclaiming purpose, bridging generational divides, and inspiring others to take bold steps no matter their age. Weeks later, the announcement came: they had won the grant. The news sparked local celebrations and national media interest. Frank was invited to speak at conferences and tech panels, not as a curiosity but as a respected innovator. One memorable event brought together senior inventors from across the country, each sharing stories of late-life breakthroughs and the fight to be seen and heard. Frank's speech was heartfelt: innovation is not the province of youth alone. It's the fire that burns in anyone willing to take a chance, to challenge what's possible, and to build a better world. We are proof that the human spirit does not fade with age, it can blaze brighter than ever. Yet, even as the spotlight grew, challenges persisted. Some funding came with strings attached, bureaucratic hurdles slowed progress, and debates over ethical AI intensified. Frank and his team navigated these complexities with transparency and resolve. They consulted ethicists, engaged community stakeholders, and ensured their technology prioritized safety and dignity. Back home, the garage became a hub of experimentation and education. Workshops welcomed newcomers of all ages, and local schools partnered with Frank to introduce robotics programs emphasizing inclusion and lifelong learning. Eddie's enthusiasm was contagious. One afternoon, he stood before a group of middle schoolers, proudly explaining Telos's capabilities. It's not just about robots, he told them. It's about dreaming big, no matter how old you are. As months passed, the Legacy Builders movement gained momentum, inspiring media campaigns, community grants, and public policy discussions focused on empowering older adults in technology fields. Frank's vision of breaking barriers, between generations, between expectation and reality, was becoming reality. One evening, as Frank packed up tools after a long day, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He looked out the window at a sky blazing with stars and thought about how far he'd come. The doubts, the loneliness, the fears, they were still there, but diminished by something stronger: hope. He whispered softly to himself, "We are not too old. We are just beginning." And with that, he turned off the lights, ready to face whatever came next. Frank felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him as he stared at the prototype on the workbench. Telos had come so far, evolving from a mere idea in a small Missouri garage to a cutting-edge drone drawing national attention. But with progress came new challenges, challenges that would test everything he believed in, including his faith in himself. A sudden setback had rattled the team. During a critical field test simulating wildfire rescue, Telos malfunctioned, losing connection and crashing in a remote forested area. The drone's expensive sensors shattered, and more than the hardware was broken, Frank's confidence wavered. Reporters caught wind of the incident, and headlines questioned the safety and reliability of autonomous tech developed by an unlikely team of senior innovators. For a moment, Frank wondered if all the hard work would unravel. But Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. Frank gathered the Legacy Builders for a late-night video call. "This is our test," he told them. "We can let this break us or make us stronger." The team rallied, poring over data, debugging software, and redesigning hardware with relentless determination. Eddie stayed up nights, programming backup protocols to prevent future loss of control. Joan organized morale-boosting calls, reminding everyone why they started. Meanwhile, Frank reached out to experts for advice and formed a partnership with a local tech university, bringing fresh eyes and resources to the problem. As they rebuilt Telos, Frank found unexpected strength in vulnerability. He shared his fears openly, inspiring others to do the same. Together, they transformed the failure into a powerful lesson. Months later, the redesigned Telos soared flawlessly over simulated disaster zones, its sensors scanning for heat signatures, its AI navigating tricky terrain with precision. The success was celebrated quietly but profoundly. The legacy builders had not only fixed a drone, they had rebuilt their faith in possibility. Amid this hard-won victory, Frank received a letter from his son Jacob. "Dad," it read, "I'm sorry for the times I doubted you. Watching your journey has changed how I see the world, and myself. I'm proud to be part of this." Frank felt tears sting his eyes. That night, as Talos rested under soft garage lights, Frank whispered, "We didn't just build a machine. We built hope." The test of faith was over, and the quiet revolution pressed on. Frank awoke with a restless energy pulsing through his veins. The summer light filtered softly through the curtains of his modest bedroom, painting warm patterns on the walls. For years, mornings had come wrapped in routine and quiet resignation. But today was different. Today marked a turning point, not just for Talos, but for Frank himself. The journey from that first spark of inspiration, ignited by Elon Musk's fearless mindset, to the revolutionary drone now capable of transforming disaster response, had changed everything. Yet Frank sensed this was only the beginning of a new chapter. He dressed quickly and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air of possibility. The small town buzzed with life as neighbors tended gardens, children played, and the hum of daily chores filled the streets. But beyond the familiar, a horizon of potential stretched wide and waiting. At the garage, Eddie was already immersed in work, adjusting circuits and testing new software. Maya, the young engineer who had challenged Frank to think bigger, arrived with a group of students eager to pitch ideas for expanding Talos's capabilities. "What if we equipped Talos with biosensors to detect environmental toxins?" one suggested. "Could it monitor air quality in real time?" asked another. Frank smiled, heart swelling with pride and hope. This mingling of generations, ideas, and passion was the true legacy. That afternoon, Frank received an unexpected invitation to attend a tech summit in San Francisco, a gathering of innovators, policymakers, and visionaries. The foundation behind their grant wanted Talos showcased as a model of inclusive innovation. The trip was daunting, but Frank accepted. On the plane, he reflected on how far he'd come, from feeling invisible and irrelevant to standing on a stage where his ideas might influence national conversations. At the summit, the energy was electric. Cutting-edge technologies buzzed in every corner, but Frank knew Talos stood out, not just for its advanced AI or modular design, but for its story of transformation. When Frank took the podium, he shared the journey honestly, the loneliness of aging, the spark of courage ignited by Elon's example, the power of community, and the unwavering belief that purpose does not fade with time. His speech was met with a standing ovation, and afterward, leaders approached him with offers to partner, fund, and scale the project. Yet Frank remained grounded. For him, the mission was personal and universal, to prove that reinvention is possible at any age, that the future belongs to those who dare to dream and build. Back home, the legacy builders welcomed him with open arms, eager to hear stories and plan next steps. Together, they envisioned Talos drones assisting in more communities, integrating new tech, and inspiring others to step beyond limits. As night fell, Frank sat on his porch, gazing at stars glittering like distant promises. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead gleamed bright. With a deep breath, he whispered, "Here's to new horizons, for me, for Talos, for all of us." And under the vast American sky, a quiet revolution continued, one heartbeat, one invention, one dream at a time. Frank sat at the edge of the workshop, the familiar scent of solder and metal surrounding him like a comforting old friend. The chatter of the legacy builders filled the air, young engineers, seasoned retirees, and everyone in between, working side by side. This place had transformed from a humble garage into a hub where age and experience blended into innovation. But today, Frank's mind drifted beyond the walls of their sanctuary. Outside, the world was grappling with divides, between generations, cultures, and ideologies. Frank saw Talos not just as a technological marvel, but as a bridge, a way to connect people who otherwise might never find common ground. The challenge was immense. Technology had the power to divide as much as to unite, depending on who wielded it and how. Frank remembered a moment from early on, when a local activist expressed skepticism. What happens if this tech is weaponized? Or if it replaces people's jobs, she had asked. The question had lingered with him. It forced him to reckon with the responsibility behind innovation. Telos had started as a symbol of defiance against aging stereotypes but had grown into something bigger, a tool with the potential to reshape communities. Inspired by Elon Musk's mindset, bold, fearless, and ethical, Frank gathered the legacy builders to discuss a new mission: use Telos to foster community connection. They launched pilot programs where drones delivered not just emergency supplies but messages from neighbors, small gifts from local businesses, and environmental data shared transparently with residents. The impact was subtle but profound. In one town, a Telos drone flew over a community garden, dropping seeds to encourage urban farming. In another, it mapped walking routes tailored for seniors, promoting health and independence. Frank watched as relationships blossomed, barriers softened, and a sense of shared purpose took root. Yet, bridging divides meant facing conflict. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some feared surveillance or loss of privacy. Frank and his team committed to transparency, hosting open forums and educating the public on data ethics and consent. They worked with legal experts and ethicists, ensuring that innovation respected human dignity. One evening, as Frank walked through the town square, a group of teenagers approached him with cautious smiles. They wanted to learn how to build drones themselves, eager to join the legacy builders. Frank saw in their eyes the same spark that had driven him years before, a hunger to create, to belong, to matter. He welcomed them warmly, knowing that true legacy is made by passing the torch. Meanwhile, Frank's relationship with Jacob deepened. Working together on Telos upgrades, father and son bridged years of distance with shared purpose. Jacob's tech expertise combined with Frank's wisdom created a synergy that energized the entire team. One afternoon, as they prepared for a community demonstration, Jacob said, "Dad, this isn't just about drones. It's about building trust." Frank nodded, realizing the profound truth in those words. Trust, between generations, communities, and technology, was the foundation of lasting change. At the next demonstration, dozens gathered to see Telos in action, marveling as the drone navigated complex environments, delivering supplies, and capturing real-time data. Questions flowed freely, conversations sparked, and for the first time, Frank felt the divide shrink. As dusk settled, Frank stood on a hill overlooking the town. The drone's lights blinked softly below, a beacon of possibility. He thought of Elon Musk's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Against all odds, they had built more than a machine, they had built a bridge. And in that bridge, Frank found hope that technology could unite rather than divide, that the future could be shared by all, regardless of age or background. With a deep breath, he whispered to the night, "This is why we create. This is why we persist." Frank sat alone in the dimly lit garage, the soft glow of Telos's charging dock casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the world buzzed with excitement over their latest breakthroughs, but inside, Frank wrestled with a different kind of tension, the hidden costs of innovation. The successes, the accolades, the growing community of legacy builders, all of it came with sacrifices that few saw. Nights spent alone fixing hardware, strained relationships, the nagging fear that one misstep could undo everything. A call from Jacob earlier in the day still echoed in his mind. "Dad, are you taking care of yourself?" Jacob had asked gently, concern evident in his voice. Frank had shrugged it off, but deep down, he knew the toll was real. The relentless pace, the pressure to prove himself again and again, it was exhausting. Elon Musk's relentless work ethic had inspired him, but Frank was learning that even the fiercest flames need tending lest they burn out. The memory of his wife Lily's smile haunted him. How long had it been since he shared a quiet moment with someone who truly understood? The solitude that once comforted now felt like a cage. Yet, retreat was not an option. The future depended on Talas's next phase, integrating autonomous decision-making for critical disaster response. The team was working around the clock, refining algorithms, running simulations, and liaising with emergency services. Each step forward carried immense responsibility. Frank felt the weight of every line of code, every circuit soldered. One night, a power surge fried a vital processor board, setting them back weeks. Frustration surged, but the team rallied, fueled by a shared vision. In the midst of the chaos, Frank found unexpected solace in moments of vulnerability. He opened up during a group meeting, admitting his fears and fatigue. The honesty sparked a wave of empathy and support. Joan suggested rotating shifts to prevent burnout. Eddie organized mindfulness sessions. Margie shared stories of her own struggles balancing innovation with self-care during the Apollo era. The legacy builders began to redefine progress, not just as technological advancement but as sustainable growth that honored the well-being of creators. Meanwhile, public scrutiny intensified. Critics questioned Talas's ethics, the risks of autonomous systems making life-or-death decisions. Frank faced tough questions at hearings and panels, defending their work with transparency and conviction. Innovation demands courage, he told one panel. But it also demands accountability. As Talas neared its next major trial, a live deployment in a controlled wildfire zone, Frank felt the convergence of hope and fear. The drone's success could cement their legacy, but failure could shatter it. On the day of the trial, the team gathered in tense anticipation. Talas lifted smoothly, its sensors scanning the landscape, relaying critical data to ground teams. The drone navigated complex terrain, identifying hotspots, locating stranded victims, and coordinating supply drops with precision. When it returned safely, cheers erupted. Tears welled in Frank's eyes, not just for the achievement but for the journey. They had weathered doubt, setbacks, and sacrifice. They had built something meaningful. Yet Frank knew the price of progress was ongoing vigilance. As he powered down Talas that evening, he whispered a vow to balance ambition with care, innovation with humanity. In the quiet, he felt a deep gratitude for the legacy builders, those who stood with him through triumph and trial. Elon Musk's words rang true: if you're trying to create a better future, you have to be ready for hard days. Frank was ready. Because this was more than technology. It was a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Frank stood at the edge of the conference hall, the buzz of anticipation swirling around him like a storm. After years of relentless work, doubts, and breakthroughs, today was the moment that could redefine everything. Talas was slated for a live, large-scale demonstration before key leaders in government, industry, and media, a chance to prove that innovation fueled by experience and grit could rival even the mightiest military technologies. The weight of expectation pressed on Frank's shoulders, but beneath it was a fierce fire, one kindled long ago by Elon Musk's example of daring to defy limitations. As he looked around, he saw the faces of his legacy builders, Joan, Eddie, Margie, Maya, Jacob, each reflecting a mix of nervous excitement and steely determination. They were more than a team, they were a family bound by a shared mission, to rewrite the narrative of aging, relevance, and possibility. The demonstration began with Talas launching into the sprawling test arena, a former military base repurposed for cutting-edge trials. The drone's sensors flickered to life, scanning the environment with uncanny precision. It maneuvered through obstacles, detected hidden heat signatures simulating human survivors, and coordinated seamlessly with ground teams. Cameras broadcast the event live, capturing the drone's every move, the silent concentration of its operators, and the growing awe of the audience. Midway through, a sudden challenge arose: a simulated system failure triggered remotely to test Talas's resilience. For a tense moment, the drone faltered, its data feed flickering. But then, a backup protocol kicked in, and Talas adapted, recalibrating autonomously to complete the mission. The crowd erupted in applause. Frank felt a surge of pride mingled with relief. This was more than a technological feat, it was a statement. Later, during a panel discussion, Frank shared the story behind Telos's creation, the journey from a lonely garage to a national stage, fueled by a refusal to accept limits imposed by age or circumstance. He spoke candidly about the challenges, the failures, and the power of community. "We are living proof," he said, "that innovation knows no age. Purpose and passion are timeless." The event sparked widespread media coverage, and soon Telos became a symbol of possibility. Proof that experience, courage, and determination could disrupt even the most entrenched systems. Invitations poured in for Frank to speak at universities, industry conferences, and even government committees shaping future technology policies. Yet amidst the acclaim, Frank remained focused on what mattered most, the people Telos could serve. He envisioned drones delivering aid to remote communities, assisting emergency responders, and bridging gaps where human reach faltered. Back home, the legacy builders expanded their mission, mentoring new recruits and fostering partnerships to scale their impact. Frank's relationship with Jacob deepened into a collaboration built on mutual respect and shared dreams. One evening, as they reviewed new designs, Jacob said, "Dad, we've done more than build a drone. We've built a legacy." Frank smiled, feeling a profound truth in those words. As he looked out at the stars that night, he whispered, "This is just the beginning." The turning point had arrived, not just for Telos or Frank, but for a generation reclaiming their power and purpose in a world eager for their contributions. The future was theirs to shape, fearless and unbound. Frank sat quietly in the early morning light, the hum of a waking world softly filtering through his window. The journey had been long, marked by doubt and discovery, struggle and triumph. Now, standing at the threshold of what felt like a new beginning, Frank allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the years spent wrestling with loneliness and fear, the times he questioned whether it was too late to matter. He recalled the spark ignited by Elon Musk's relentless belief in pushing beyond limits, not because failure was shameful, but because it was necessary for growth. Telos was no longer just a drone or a project, it was a testament to the human spirit's capacity for reinvention. The technology they had built had outperformed expectations, even surpassing some of the most advanced military systems. Yet, for Frank, the true victory lay not in accolades but in purpose regained and shared. His son Jacob now stood beside him, not just as family but as a partner in vision and action. Together, they had transformed a spark of defiance into a blazing beacon of hope for a generation often overlooked. The legacy builders had grown into a movement. An inspiring coalition of seniors, young innovators, and communities united by a shared commitment to proving that age is no barrier to impact. Frank's phone buzzed gently with messages from around the country, stories of seniors starting new ventures, communities adopting Telos-inspired technology, and individuals reclaiming their own narratives. He smiled, realizing that what began as a personal rebellion had become a collective revolution. Standing, Frank stepped outside onto his porch. The morning air was crisp, alive with possibility. Neighbors waved as they passed, and children's laughter echoed from nearby playgrounds. He felt deeply connected, to the town, to the people, and to the future they were shaping together. In the quiet moments, Frank reflected on the lessons learned, that transformation begins with courage to take the first step, that community breathes life into dreams, and that legacy is forged through action, not age. "I was never too old," he thought, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." As the sun climbed higher, Frank reached for his journal, a place where he recorded hopes, ideas, and gratitude. He penned a note to the legacy builders: "We are the architects of tomorrow, fearless and unbound. Let's keep building, dreaming, and proving that the best chapters are still ahead." With a deep breath, Frank looked to the horizon, where the sky met the earth in endless possibility. Elon Musk's voice echoed one final time in his heart: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Against all odds, Frank and the legacy builders had created more than technology. They had created a new legacy, one of resilience, hope, and the enduring power to change not just machines, but lives. And as the world awakened around him, Frank knew this was only the beginning of a story far greater than any one person. It was a story of renewal, connection, and boundless human potential. The quiet revolution continued, one heartbeat, one invention, one dream at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?